You are standing on a silent shoreline. There are no houses behind you, no roads, no voices, no distant airplane crossing the sky. The ocean stretches endlessly in front of you, and the only sound is the rhythm of waves touching the sand. You wait for another human being to appear. An hour passes, then a day, then a year, then 10 years. Eventually, you begin to forget what conversation sounds like. One morning, after decades alone, you catch yourself speaking to the wind as if it were a friend. And for a brief moment, it answers. Or at least you think it does. The question is not whether loneliness would affect you. The question is, how isolated can a human being become before their mind begins to create a new reality? To understand that, we need to meet some of the most isolated humans who have ever lived. Humans are a deeply social species. For almost all of our evolutionary history, being alone was dangerous. A solitary human was more vulnerable to predators, injury, starvation, and attack from rival groups. Our brains evolved around constant social contact. Every conversation, every facial expression, every shared meal acts as a kind of neurological maintenance system. When those signals disappear, strange things begin to happen. One of the most famous examples was Alexander Selkirk, a Scottish sailor stranded on an island in the Pacific Ocean in the early 1700s. For more than 4 years, he lived almost entirely alone. At first, he reportedly experienced overwhelming despair. But eventually, his brain adapted. He developed routines. He hunted. He built shelter. When rescuers finally arrived, something unexpected had happened. He had become uncomfortable around people. After years without society, human interaction itself felt foreign. Yet 4 years is only the beginning. The true extremes of isolation are far more difficult to imagine. In the Arctic, trappers and explorers sometimes spent entire winters alone in remote cabins, surrounded by darkness for months. Many reported hearing voices. Others described sensing invisible companions standing nearby. Psychologists now have a name for this phenomenon: the third man factor. Under extreme isolation, stress, and loneliness, the brain sometimes generates the feeling that another person is present, not because the individual has lost their mind, but because the social machinery of the brain continues searching for company. In a sense, the brain would rather invent another person than accept absolute solitude. Then, there are the castaways. Throughout history, sailors have become stranded on remote islands for years at a time. Some adapted remarkably well. Others experienced profound psychological changes. Many developed rituals, routines, and imaginary conversations. These behaviors may sound unusual, but they reveal something important. The human brain is not designed merely to survive. It is designed to connect. Remove all human contact, and the mind begins creating substitutes. But perhaps the most extraordinary examples come from people who deliberately chose isolation. Across history, hermits have withdrawn from society for religious, philosophical, or personal reasons. Some spent decades living alone in deserts, forests, mountains, and caves. One of the most famous was Simeon Stylites, who lived atop a pillar for decades in the 5th century. Others retreated even further, seeking lives almost entirely disconnected from civilization. Many reported profound spiritual experiences, visions, voices, a heightened sense of meaning. Modern neuroscience offers an interesting possibility. When the normal flood of social information disappears, the brain may redirect its attention inward. Thoughts become louder. Memories become more vivid. Dreams become harder to distinguish from waking reality. The boundary between imagination and perception can become surprisingly flexible. And this brings us to one of the most isolated humans in modern history. For decades, on a remote island in the Andaman archipelago, lived a man known to the outside world only as the last survivor of his people. His tribe had been nearly erased by disease and colonization. As the years passed, he became one of the final links to an entire culture. Imagine carrying an entire language, history, and worldview inside your mind while having almost nobody left to share it with. Isolation is not merely physical distance. It can also mean becoming separated from everyone who understands your world. But perhaps the most isolated human alive today belongs to an even rarer category: the voluntarily isolated. Scattered across remote forests, deserts, mountains, and islands are individuals who have intentionally withdrawn from human society for years or even decades. Some reject modern civilization. Others seek peace. Some simply prefer solitude. What happens to the brain under those conditions? Researchers studying isolation have discovered a fascinating pattern. The first stage is usually emotional discomfort. Humans naturally crave connection. Without it, stress hormones often increase. Sleep can become disrupted. Mood can decline. But if isolation continues, adaptation begins. The brain starts reorganizing. Attention shifts. Internal thoughts become more detailed. People often develop stronger relationships with animals, landscapes, objects, and memories. Eventually, time itself can feel different. Many isolated individuals report losing their normal sense of days, weeks, and months. Without social schedules, the clock inside the mind begins drifting. The brain also changes structurally. Studies of prolonged isolation have found alterations in regions associated with memory, emotion, and social processing. Even short periods of extreme isolation can affect cognition. Astronaut simulations, Antarctic expeditions, and remote research stations consistently reveal changes in mood, concentration, and perception. And those environments still involve occasional human contact. True isolation is something else entirely. It is difficult to measure because so few people ever experience it. But there appears to be a threshold where the absence of social interaction becomes one of the most powerful environmental forces acting on the human mind. Now consider the numbers. The average person speaks thousands of words every day. They exchange countless glances. They encounter friends, family, co-workers, strangers, and digital interactions almost continuously. Over a single decade, that adds up to millions upon millions of social moments. An individual living completely alone for 30 years experiences almost none of them. It is not simply a reduction. It is the removal of an entire dimension of human existence. Trying to imagine this gap is like imagining the difference between standing beneath a waterfall and standing in a desert where no rain has fallen for decades. The scale is almost impossible to grasp. Imagine a beach stretching across the entire planet. Every grain of sand represents a conversation. Most people collect mountains of them throughout life. The extremely isolated collect only a handful. Yet somehow, their minds continue building worlds from what little remains. And that may be the most remarkable part of this story. Isolation can alter memory. It can change personality. It can reshape perception. It can make the brain invent companions, distort time, and blur the line between reality and imagination. But again and again, humans adapt. The mind bends without completely breaking. Even in extraordinary solitude, people find meaning. They create routines. They tell stories. They discover new versions of themselves. Which brings us back to you. Right now, somewhere nearby, another person is living a life as complex and vivid as your own. You exist inside an invisible network of billions of human connections stretching across the planet. Most of the time, we barely notice it. A greeting, a message, a conversation, a familiar face. These moments seem ordinary because they are common. But to the most isolated human alive, they would be priceless. The mathematics of isolation reveal something profound. Human connection is not a luxury. It is one of the defining conditions of being human. And the fact that you are here, listening to another human story, connected through words across distance and time, is a reminder of how extraordinary the connection really is. In a universe filled with silence, every voice is a small miracle.